Hey everyone, it's Anthony Onesto, and believe it or not, we are back. New York HR is back for our April showing. We took a hiatus. We've made some moves, and unfortunately, Steve Levy could not make our show today, or fortunately, depending on your perspective. We have Janine Truitt, the Czarina of HR, as our guest co-host. Very excited. Welcome, Janine.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be back.
Oh yeah, and Janine was on our show a couple of episodes ago. She was a victim to one of our first few.
Correct. I was in the hot seat.
You were in the hot seat, and now you get to ask the questions. So that
much moved up in the world.
I question the move up piece. All I know is that it's the collective IQ of New York HR has gone up by tenfold by replacing Steve with you. So glad to have you here. And Janine joins us from Talent Think Innovations. I don't know why I stumble on that all the time.
Everybody does. I have no idea why.
We'll let you talk a little bit about what you do at the end of the show there. I'd love for the viewers to see that. So this month, our first victim of 2018 is Ashley Westbook. Welcome, Ashley, to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, super excited to have you on board as the first person in 2018. So Ashley joins us from Tigerspike, which is a digital product company here in New York City. Very interesting background. Before I bore everyone with my speech, tell us a little bit. You're born in New Jersey. You grew up in Brooklyn. You're in New York. Like, it's so hard to find original New Yorkers anymore. As I walk around the city, it's all implants these days. But tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about your history.
Yeah, I've been a lot of places and I've done a lot of things. I almost feel like I'm a global traveler in that sense.
Great, awesome.
So yeah, born and raised in New Jersey. For anyone who knows northern New Jersey and Watchung, New Jersey, very much in the Watchung Hills. So the beginning of I guess it's the beginning of the mountains that go up to the Poconos. So and kind of been moved to the city. Kind of went to high school in Brooklyn and have kind of lived in the city. Really kind of the rest of my life. Went to college up in Westchester. So again, kind of keeping with the whole
Where'd you go to high school
thing.
Where'd you go to high school in Brooklyn?
So I went to Berkeley Carroll, which is in Park Slope.
Okay.
For high school. And then for college, I went up to Manhattanville, which is a super small liberal arts school in Purchase, New York.
Great. And what did you study in Manhattan?
Yeah, great question. So I was actually a dance and theater major in college. Really interesting how I kind of fell into HR and recruitment. Never the last thing that I thought I would ever do. So I started performing and dancing when I was really, really little. Probably, I think I was about 2.5 or 3. My mom put me in those little like ballet tap combo class. Apparently, I told her at the age of 3 that tap was too loud for me. Tap was too loud. Okay. And so kind of sticked with the ballet throughout school, did the Nutcracker for a couple seasons in Jersey. Paper Mill Playhouse, shout out to local New Jersey. Paper Mill Playhouse.
I remember going on trips as a young kid to the Paper Mill Playhouse.
Yes.
That and the what was the zoo? The Turtleback Zoo.
The Turtleback Zoo in West Orange, New Jersey.
A little throwback to New Jersey there. Yeah.
Which, by the way, the Turtleback has really grown over the last couple of years. That whole little section, they've kind of added on some stuff. So it's a really great, spend the day in Jersey.
Yeah,
go to the zoo.
It was like 2 animals. I think it was like a squirrel and a bird when I went there. So so
yep.
Very cool.
Definitely.
Okay, so now theater, interesting. I wonder how many, and Janine, maybe you have a thought on this. How many people fall into HR and recruiting? Like, I wonder what the statistic is.
Yeah, well, I was interested because I looked you up, Ashley. I felt like I needed to, but I thought that was interesting, the whole dance background. I feel like more so than any other industry, HR is that industry that's almost like the melting pot of degree fields or majors, if you will. I think you can almost find anybody of any degree background having funneled into HR. I'm not sure why that is. I think there's a low barrier to entry, but that's a separate topic sometimes. But
very true. What did you study, Janine? I know we're not interviewing you, but just
yeah. So I started off as a biochem major, and then I switched over to psych. So I was clinical psych, and then I went into industrial psych. So ultimately industrial psych.
I remember that. Yeah. And I was an accounting major. So the three of us didn't study.
You see?
Yeah.
Everything.
Thank God I got that.
Like New York. It's like New York.
Yeah, exactly. Diverse. Exactly. All right. Back to Ashley. So we went through the diversity in New York. All right. So now you're in Manhattanville. You have your degree. What's your next step there?
Well, Broadway was always my aim. So in high school, I started taking voice lessons. I wanted to go the conservatory route. My dad, who, bless his heart, is very much a business guy, wanted me to kind of get the BA degree, you know, for the backup.
Oh, cool. Always have a plan. Yep.
Yeah, I started doing some really interesting infusing of video and live performance. This is kind of, you know, pre it actually becoming a thing back in college. I actually started a little bit back in high school, and so kind of got into video editing. I studied abroad for about 6 months in college. We had to do actually a junior and a senior thesis in my program, so it was a little bit intense. And so I was like, I'm going to shoot all this different footage around Paris. I'm going to throw it on a white wall, and I'm going to have people dance in front of it and make it look like they kind of pop out of the video. It was actually pretty cool, but I was like, how do I figure out how to edit video other than literally VHS to VHS? So I took a 1 week intensive at NYU in Final Cut right before I started my next semester. And then I kind of got the bug for like editing, which is interesting, which is actually when I graduated, I ended up working as a professional editor for about 3 years here in New York at a lot of different post-production houses. So
any interesting edits or any video?
Yeah, I mean, some interesting things. I did a couple of like reality things, a couple of like a slasher murder movie, a couple commercials. Actually, it's funny.
Anything we know?
Well, so one commercial, every time I see the newest commercial running on TV, I kind of cringe. So Huntington Learning Center, which everyone knows, right?
No kidding.
And
wait, hold on. The Huntington Learning Center, is that the where the
like test prep?
Yep.
The test prep, and there's always like the footage of like the kids and like the individual things.
Yeah.
And it was funny because they couldn't decide, you know, 1-800-CAN-LEARN. They have like the 1-800 number, and then they had like local numbers for all the different areas. And they couldn't decide whether they wanted a hyphen or no hyphen between the 800 and CAN-LEARN. So it was like back and forth, hyphen, no hyphen.
No hyphen.
And so it's to this day, I see that commercial, I was just like, oh no, it's the hyphen. Do they have the hyphen? And they've completely changed it. It's quite hysterical.
It's actually the newer ones are looking at the older ones, right? They're supposed to be like, you were the kid as the adult now. Anyway, we're going into, we could talk about that for a while. But I remember those commercials. Yeah, those are great. All right, so now so you're in theater, you're in dance, you're now in editing. Where does HR come in? Like how'd you make that jump?
Great question. So I love doing editing. I was still doing theater on the side. I realized I didn't really want to do it professionally and do all the odd jobs. So still kind of performing on the side, but loved editing, but you know, no one really hires a resident editor. So it was like a week here, a few days here. And I kind of wanted a bit more stability. And so which I would never recommend to anyone, I applied to a Craigslist ad for this super small tech company that was looking for, I don't even know what the role was. It was like some sort of assistant or something. And it's like the scene of a horror movie. It was like, I was supposed to go meet this guy at an apartment in Brooklyn to interview for this job, which is like, this is like, you know, I'm going to get killed and never see my family again.
On Craigslist. No.
On Craigslist.
It wasn't even a job.
Although this was like 2005, so not quite as shady then as it might be now.
Right, true.
And
interface, but yeah.
It turned out to be the best move. So it was a small company called Caljon. No one would have ever heard of it, but basically started as an assistant and very quickly actually helped run the company for my boss.
How big were they?
We were only a couple of people, but it was very much in the tech infrastructure. So this is kind of where the falling into recruiting kind of falls in. So it was kind of working as an account client manager, but also project manager, and then fell into recruiting because I needed people for my projects. So very much tech infrastructure. So we would go into retail companies and we'd swap out all of their computer systems, their POS systems, their kiosks. So Home Depot, Kohl's, any kind of retail type outlets. And we would do this for all the locations all over the US.
And this was all out of his apartment, or he had an office?
It was, so there was a buddy of his, and so they were kind of just doing it in their apartment. I ended up working from home most of the time, but it actually ended up being the best job because I kind of really got to understand the business side and really running a business, everything from running payroll to dealing with clients, traveling to go meet clients around the country, running the projects, and a lot of good project management skills, which I highly, highly recommend for anyone getting into recruitment and HR. I think it's a really great foundation. And then, recruiting, and again, go backing to Craigslist, using Craigslist to find people all over the country, because I was having to hire local techs all over the country.
Craigslist again. So the way you found your job, you used it to find other people.
Yep.
Okay. And you found success using, I mean, are you using Craigslist today, or is it too spammy?
No, again, this was like, early days of Craigslist, all jobs were free, people were kind of leveraging it a little bit differently then. Sure. So yeah, I stayed there for about 18 months until the company was kind of sold, and then landed at Robert Half. So probably one of the largest staffing companies.
I was there. Early in my career, I worked for Account Temps and then Robert Half. Yeah.
Yep. So I worked for both the tech and the creative side. I spent almost 8 years at Robert Half.
Wow, you were the one. No,
a long time.
Robert Half.
Like dog
advertised, please feel free, but I was kidding.
Yeah. Yes, a big fan of Robert Half. I learned a lot while I was there.
Again, you're probably the only. No, just kidding.
I'm a lifer. I'm a half lifer in that sense.
That's a long. I mean, for any like boutique or big recruiting firm, 8 years is a long time. And you worked in their creative division, tech division?
So I started in the tech division. So I worked on Robert Half Technology, which is the tech division, for about 5.5 years. And so I landed at Robert Half. I didn't know anything about software development. Like I didn't know Java from C++, what's Sybase, what's COBOL, and so very quickly, I somehow had a knack for understanding computers. I actually grew up with computers because my dad did computers in the Army. So I grew up with a Compact and, early Macs, sure. And so, was always kind of around computers. Dad is a huge DOS fan. I hate DOS. As soon as we got Windows in school, I was so excited.
All right.
Having a mouse, genius.
That's a creative side of it.
Yes, there we go. Yep. And so, I just, taught myself the right things. I was really good about asking the right questions, and really quickly kind of became kind of one of our lead tech recruiters, and really kind of helped do all the hiring and training, while still kind of operating as a kind of a lead recruiter, and then made the move over actually to the creative side to kind of build up our creative team, and then did about 2.5 years there before I made the move to Tigerspike.
Fantastic. So what are a couple of things, it's very regimented. You have to make certain phone calls. You're like, what would you say are the takeaways you took, when you were working there from a recruiting perspective that you use today?
Yeah, no, great question. It is a very metrics organization, any kind of staffing company, right? It's about how many calls, how many people you're meeting, how many people you're placing. And I think at the end of the day, for me, big takeaways of why I was really successful and why I'm successful is I think you have to treat people like people. I think a lot of people forget nowadays that people think of people as resources and like filling a job or just placing people, but like people are people, and how do we treat people, the way they should be treated? How do we take the time to listen? How do we take the time to ask the right questions, but also add value? And so I think that's where, a combination of a lot of those things, understanding technology. So while obviously I've tried to code, but I can't really code, I understand technology really well. So I can talk very technical. So I think that also really helped me. But I think it's taking the time to have a really, really good experience. And I would say that's one of the core values that I found that has been very successful. And that's something that I always continue to instill in others, because that's the one thing that you can't necessarily train someone. You just have to naturally, be that type of person that cares. Sure. And so I think that's in some cases where some people fail, because they're thinking about, they get, nervous about hitting numbers and this and that. But in essence, if you just kind of do what you need to do, the numbers will come.
So it's interesting. I mean, if Steve Levy were here, he just would absolutely love what you just said, right? He talks about how they're not candidates, they're people. So we have to think differently about it. It's probably one of the smartest things he says when he's on the show. So when thinking about the metric side, so what have you taken into Tigerspike around the metrics? Because I know we talked a little bit in discussion for our interview about your interest in that side of the space. What are you looking at? What are, there's a lot of debate, and Janine, I love your thoughts on this. You're more on the recruiting side than I am, but this whole idea of time to fill and quality of hire, like there's this constant tug of war in recruiting about what to measure. What are you seeing? First maybe Janine could provide her input, but like, is there a debate, or what are people looking at?
So, I think we're just not as far along as we'd like to think we are when it comes to analytics. I mean, there's this whole, I don't know that there can be a debate when the vast majority of organizations can only ever focus on just-in-time reporting. And that was something that I kind of, came to on my own. So I'm curious to know, from Ashley, like how that works at Tigerspike. Are you still very much in a just-in-time space? Or have you guys kind of evolved beyond that and gotten really into digging deep into analytics? Because it's my sense, even just from speaking around the country, that a lot of organizations just aren't there yet. They'd like to be there. They'd like to be at the predictive and prescriptive level, but that is like light years away for many recruitment teams. So just curious.
Sure, yeah. And I think it's an interesting topic. I think it's something that a lot of people are really interested in, but they don't really know where to start. So quick backstory. So when I joined Tigerspike, I actually joined to start the whole talent function. So before I started, actually almost 3 years ago now, the talent team didn't actually exist within Tigerspike. How we grew to 180 people without actually having that, kudos to them. So initially, a lot of, it's, when you kind of try to start up a function, it's very much focused on I need to fill roles really, really fast, right? I need to add value. And I think we're getting to the point where we've kind of grown and built out now a global team that kind of sit across a lot of our global offices. We're kind of at the point where we can really start to kind of hone in on areas of looking at trends. So obviously there's the candidate side of it. And then there's the employee side. And I do believe very much that while a lot of companies kind of separate kind of the recruitment and like everything else HR, I really feel like it's a connected journey. And so even though I come predominantly from the recruitment side, I've kind of fallen to HR just naturally because I've been that type of person that's kind of, been the listener. I think it's a really connected experience that I think is really, really important. But I think from a candidate perspective, starting to look at the data for trends and really starting to predict things, right? So when we're starting to kind of see, where do we see success when we fill certain roles? So internally at Tigerspike, we have a lot of different types of functions, a lot of very specialized functions. So we're hiring, web and mobile engineers, we're hiring really talented product strategists and researchers, UI, UX, product folks. And so when we start to look at some of those core skill sets that are very much in demand, and then we look at that across a global landscape, we're now 10 offices globally, pretty much across almost every continent. And so how do we start to look at trends, not only locally, but globally? And where do we start to kind of see success for certain roles? And where do we start to see success in kind of our employee branding and that kind of strategy too? Do we find that, we do really great in referrals for certain types of skill sets? Do we find that going to meetups and networking events and that is more successful, and then starting to see those trends. So we can kind of focus our energy, right, in where we should be focusing our energy. And same thing on the employee side, right? In most companies, right, you have this point where, people become disengaged, right? They're no longer engaged, either they're not challenged, they have no opportunity for promotion, whatever the case may be, bad line manager. And you start to kind of see a trend. And I think it's really interesting where we started to do some mapping of seeing that trend drop off at a certain point. And it tends to be around the 2-year mark, which I think is pretty standard, within the industry, sometimes less, sometimes more, but starting to see certain activities that might trigger that not to happen at that point. So I think when we start to think of predicting things, professional development. We have a really great global mobility opportunity. So employees can actually work on projects in other offices and actually support global transfers. And so I think there's certain things like investing in people, continuous learning, really being able to challenge people. You start to see those activities start to keep people more engaged over longer time periods. And I think that's where the data, not just to be data. The data can really tell a story. And I think that that's some really interesting stuff now. Again, every company, I think it depends on what is important to you. You know, what is the story you need to tell to the business, whether it's to get a seat at the table, whether it's to promote things like proactive recruitment and proactive hiring, not just being reactive, right? You know, the proof is in the data. And when you can provide that and tell that story, that I think starts to become really, really interesting.
Now, I'm sorry, Janine, go ahead.
I love everything you said. And I wanted to also ask you, you know, who owns that piece of actually having to look at the data and the trending and all of that? Because one thing I do know is recruiters are deathly afraid of it. And most people in HR just don't want to touch it. And so there's been a lot of talk about down the line, if not already, HR having a statistician or a data scientist earmarked specifically to kind of go through those numbers, crunch them, and also provide that narrative and that story for the recruiters, for the talent team, because ultimately they don't really care about the numbers, or maybe it's not in their wheelhouse to do that. And, you know, all they really need to get to is what is the trend and what do I need to improve upon? So I'm always curious as to like who's owning that particular piece, just because of that sentiment.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think, you know, you start to see large companies that are building out these functions, you know, specifically to support this need. And then it's actually interesting, a lot of, because I'm really interested in data and analytics and, you know, how we can kind of, you know, better leverage this, going to a lot of meetups and just talking to people that are kind of like number one in that function. Like, how do you even, like, where do you start? You know, right? The business said, hey, we need someone in this role. Go. Right. And so I think for us, you know, we're just getting to the point, and this is some of the things that I think I'm really interested in. And so some of the things that we're starting to kind of drive locally. I don't think we're at the point where we would have someone dedicated. I think very much in our culture of continuous learning as a company, you know, people that have natural interest in these types of things, being able to advocate for that. So I personally, on the side of many hobbies that I have, I'm teaching myself you know, and starting to really look at things like Tableau and look at different ways, you know, that we can start to kind of analyze this data. So interestingly enough, we actually just launched our very first global HR platform about a year ago now, about 6 months ago now. We went live. And so now that we actually have a lot of our employee data, that we can actually start to kind of look into the analytics and look into the data, because I think that's the biggest challenge. Mm-hmm. Same thing on the candidate side too. You know, we have an ATS, it's really not meant for global companies. So, you know, the data that's there isn't really good data. So where do you start, right? How do you start to, you know, create a structure of what type of data do you want to create, and then take it from there. So I think large organizations, I think you definitely need to have someone that's dedicated, but I think you also need someone that understands the recruitment side, understands the HR side, because I almost feel like it's kind of hard just to be, you know, a data scientist and be able to look at data, but not understand the context of that data.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, they're very much in the weeds of the numbers. So I agree with that. Like, as a recruitment professional, you need to be able to connect the true dots, like on the ground, like, okay, well, I know that these numbers mean something because I understand the interaction with that particular hiring manager or that particular department. And that's what's impacting our time to fill or something like that. So completely agree.
Yeah, I mean, just to get a snapshot of Tigerspike, you talked about 10 global offices. How many employees do you guys have? Yep. How many folks in HR, just to get sort of a blueprint of what your org looks like?
Yeah, so we're sitting at about 320 employees as of today globally, which is not a very large headcount. And so we've opened 2 of our offices in the last 6 months. Great. And so, you know, definitely we've been growing globally footprint, but we necessarily haven't grown huge headcounts in those local markets. I think for us, you know, strategic growth is really, really important. You know, we don't want to go hire 400 people tomorrow. I think it's very much about hiring the right people and growing our culture. So when I started 3 years ago, obviously I kind of, you know, first person in to kind of build out the talent function. I was like the tester. Let's see if this works. And very quickly, within like 2 months, I started talking to our GM of our Dubai office, where we were seeing a lot of growth, started to look at hiring somebody locally in that market. And so I've kind of helped to kind of build it globally. We now have somebody sitting in London and also someone sitting in Sydney. And we're actually currently hiring for Singapore and Tokyo. And so we're starting to kind of build out that function. I think the big challenge we have now is most of us sit and do everything from the recruitment to the HR side. So we're getting to that point where it really becomes very, very tough bandwidth-wise when we're in really big spurts of hiring, where when you have to, you're a one person locally in some cases having to cover all that, what becomes priority?
Sure.
Hiring. But in my mind, right, your people always have to be priority. So how do you start to think strategically, and how do you start to focus on what the business needs, but not forget about your people? And I think, that's where organizations start to kind of need to break off or have a bit more focuses. But I still think having that connected piece.
So what, you talked about a global HR system. Who are you using?
So we are using Namely.
Okay.
Which I know that you have a little bit of a...
I do have a connection. Full disclosure, I'm an advisor, Namely, and I like to hear that they're global, which is fantastic. Actually, user. I was originally like alpha introduction to Matt Straz, who's the founder, Namely, many years ago at Big Fuel, and I've been an advisor since. But now I am an official user of the current platform, which is really interesting. So, and from an ATS perspective, I know you said it wasn't global, but who are you guys using? Yeah,
so we are using an ATS called Jazz, formerly called Resumator.
Yeah, they should have stayed with Resumator, by the way.
It's great for a single location. It is not meant for a global company. Ultimately, we were looking at going, and the HR platform was more important, so we went that route first. And then the hope is starting to kind of look at an ATS that better supports. Shout out, if I can give a plug to a software, shout out to Hello Talent, because I actually stumbled across this. I don't know if either of you are familiar with this. HelloTalent.com, I believe it is. So when you're doing a lot of sourcing, so we do a lot of sourcing. Obviously, in my whole career, I've done a lot of sourcing, spreadsheets or whatnot, finding a really easy way to manage, people you're reaching out to, conversations and notes. I stumbled across this tool called Hello Talent. They were actually in beta at the time. And we started using it internally. It kind of fits nicely with our ATS. So we can do a lot of our sourcing. They've got plugins, so Chrome extensions and things like that. So if we're doing a lot of LinkedIn or,
and what does it do? What's the function of it?
Yeah, so you can kind of capture information. You can kind of customize it and set up tags, quickly write notes. So if I'm on LinkedIn and maybe looking for a certain type of skill set, I can quickly go through profiles, make some notes, and kind of just using the extension, add it to kind of my mini database, so to speak. That way I can kind of go back and reach out to people directly all in one. It's just a really easy way. Right now, otherwise in our ATS, I'd have to copy and paste everything in. There's no easy way to kind of upload. And so when you're doing a lot of sourcing and doing a lot of reach out, it's not really useful. So we found that to be really, really a helpful tool.
So it's called Hello Talent. Interesting.
Hello Talent.
LinkedIn Recruiter is just absolutely awful. So anything to stay out of that would be great. Shout out to LinkedIn, by the way. Our former advertiser. No, they never were. So what do you think? So thank you for that. And I want to dive back into the analytics in a second, but we talk a lot about New York, right? So we're obviously New York HR.
New York.
Why do you think New York is a challenging place to run HR recruiting, or a better place than Silicon Valley? Like we're still number 2 in the tech sector, but I think we're making a lot of progress around that. Why do you think it's unique to recruit New York, and why, is it good, bad, indifferent? What are your thoughts there? I mean, assuming, that what it is to recruit in Silicon Valley, but what do you personally think is great about New York? Yeah,
great question. Well, I've definitely recruited out that way and in a couple of global markets, but obviously I've been recruiting in New York now for over 10 years. And so I think New York is just, it's very unique because you just have this really interesting mix of people. Ironically, talking about theater background, I would say in the tech space specifically, I would say 75 to 80% of the people I've come across have some sort of connection to the arts, which is really, really fascinating to kind of see this hybrid mix of backgrounds. backgrounds kind of coming together. So, I mean, I've hired people from actors to musicians to you name it. So it's really kind of interesting to see a lot of commonalities outside of that specific industry. But I think it's just, it's kind of this hubbub of people coming together with ideas. Obviously a very strong, type of meetup networking type community. And I guess that's really what I would call it. I guess it's this really interesting community of people that, not to say that other markets are like that, but it's this community of coming together, having ideas, sharing it, and really trying to create something. And I think it's unique because of the people, honestly. You get people that are local, you get people that are coming from all over, people that everyone wants to come to New York. It's always funny when, someone pings me on LinkedIn, or I meet someone at a meetup, they're like, oh, I would love to come to New York. Or, my dream is to come to New York. And right, there's just something unique and magical that people have always thought of when you come to New York.
Yeah, I'd love to come to New York, and then they pay their first rent check, and they're like, "What am I doing?
Where am I?"
Right.
Yeah. So what would you change? I have an opinion on HR in New York. I don't think we're, and that's the purpose of the show to a certain degree, is to start really building a community of HR professionals. I arguably, and I'll say this publicly and on camera, I don't think SHRM does a really good job in networking folks. And some of the events aren't that great. There's not a lot of conversation around innovation. Most of it is very tactical HR, which again, I think is important. But what would you change differently about being an HR professional in New York? Like, what would you need? Like, do you need anything? Are you happy with the networking opportunities here?
No, that's a great question. I think, I've, in the last 8 or 9 months, I've stumbled across a lot of really interesting groups of people. In some cases, just people that I've met throughout the industry, other networking events. So like Disrupt HR, I'm a really, really big fan of. I started going to the New York City chapter, back in the fall. And so
Disrupt a little bit, because I felt like I went into one and I was excited because I heard the word disrupt, and obviously Janine and Steve know I'm a big disrupt guy, and I felt like it was like same old. But you're saying no.
I really love the format. So for anyone who doesn't know about Disrupt HR, typically the format is you get, I think it's about 5 minutes. And so you get 5 minutes on a specific topic, and it can be on pretty much anything. Some of them can be pretty crazy. One had props that I was at, and they were like throwing things at the audience, very interactive. And so in some cases,
No, I'm kidding.
Well, I do think, right, it can always be hit or miss, right? Whenever you have an open forum, right, for people to present an idea and suggestion, different people are going to be better at presenting than others, right? But I think it's a great forum to give people the opportunity to get in front of a group of colleagues and talk about something that they're interested in, talk about something that they're passionate. And I think that's the challenge with a lot of networking and meetups nowadays. It's like, talk about a buzz topic like diversity inclusion, right? And then people just put together a panel and they just talk about something. It's like, we're talking about things, we're not actually changing things, or we're not actually innovating and disrupting and actually coming together, creating ideas and taking it back to our companies. Because I think especially in New York, you get a lot of people who work in small organizations where they might be the only person in their function, right? So how do you create a community where people can learn and share from each other, and take suggestions and then take it back to their companies, or be able to come together to have these types of groups? And so I do think that's one of the good things I do like about HR Disrupt, and having that networking opportunities and just getting to see different groups of people, kind of what they're thinking about or what's important to them or what's on their mind. And so I would love to start to see more of those types of groups kind of form and come up, and people that are interested in different topics, so that we can kind of start talking about it and figure out ways that we can, be innovators and be disruptors. I think, even when you start to think of new technology like AI, and blockchain, it's like, these are buzzwords, great. But how is this going to improve business? How is it going to create efficiency, but not take away the experience, and still create a really great experience for your employees or your candidates? It's using the technology that can be helpful, so that way we can think more strategically. And I think that's the big thing for a lot of people, is like, how can I be strategic? How can I have the seat at the table so I can prove to the business the value that my function has to the company?
Interesting. So maybe I'll give it another chance. By the way, for the record, Ashley said the word AI, Steve, not me. I didn't bring up AI. It was Ashley that brought up AI. Okay. Sorry, Janine, did you have a comment?
Oh, that's okay. I have a question. So kind of piggybacking off of what Anthony was saying with regard to SHRM, and I don't expect you to make an official statement on it, but I do wonder, as you're building out, your HR function continuously and even globally, what your opinion is on how important it is for an HR practitioner to be formally trained with some sort of certification, such as the PHR or the GPHR or the SHRM SCP. In your opinion, what is the makings of a good HR person? And I know that that's really broad, depending on the role that you're talking about, but what do you hang your hat on?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. It's something that I personally looked into to say, is this something that I should get, one of these certifications, and I think then it's a starting point of like, which one do you get, which one should I go for, and so I think with anything, and I think this has just been certifications and everything. And again, I don't know enough to really speak to it, but I think it's like the value of the experience and what you can do. I think a lot of people hide behind certifications, and I saw this a lot in the tech space. Early days where it was like, PHP certified or this certified or Red Hat certified. And so in some cases they are very important, right? Certifications hold a really high degree of your knowledge and your experience. In other cases, it's just like, so actually back when I worked as a PM, I was looking at, do I get the PMP? Is that something that I strive for, right? And so I think at the end of the day, for me, just having something else attached to the back of my name, what is that really going to show, right? Versus, some of the ideas that I have, and can I just, what can we accomplish? And, so I'm kind of mixed, to be honest. I know it's definitely really important to some people because it kind of shows a status of, I'm a senior, or I've gotten my certification. But at the end of the day, I think with anything, it's like, what are your ideas? What do you want to do, right? Versus, what can you do?
Absolutely.
I am totally biting my lip on that question. Oh yeah, I've actually tweeted out about this a couple of times. I feel like it's inversely proportional innovation to the amount of letters you have at the end of your name in HR. I think the more SPHRs and whatever super HPRs or any of them, you're just sort of, you got that baseline knowledge. And like you said, I think the important piece of this is not the certification, but the experience. But there's such, there just seems such a lack of innovation, or at least creative thought, but that's a general statement. So just getting back, I wanted to talk about analytics. We have a couple of minutes and then we'll hit our pizza question. What are you tracking? So you talked about being interested in metrics. You think they're important. And by the way, look into this company called Humanaze, started by Ben Weber over at MIT Lab. There's, his whole premise is that there's already metrics in the information you have in your company, whether it's email and other things. Really interesting stuff. Fairly expensive to do, but really interesting in terms of, let's figure out what's already in the company as opposed to installing another piece of tech.
Yep.
To gather metrics. But anyway, what are you measuring at Tigerspike? What are the things that you're looking at? Is there anything different that you're looking at that maybe we don't know about?
Yeah, I think, I would say from the candidate side, I think it's definitely the trends. I think that's really important to us. It's not so much time to fill. Our roles are very unique and very specific and very specialized, right? So, we're looking for top engineers in the world's top markets, right? So I think things like, trends, where we can start to see success and we can grow upon that, especially when it comes to referrals. I think that's some of the interesting things that we're really, really focused on. Less the general ones of time to fill, time between steps. I think we always wanted to strive for efficiency, right? When I first started at Tigerspike, it's kind of really interesting to start to hear about the interview process, right? And I was talking to actually some colleagues in our Melbourne office, and they said, oh yeah, okay, so what we do is, we look at a resume, if we like someone, we bring them in, and we bring them in for 2 hours. And my jaw just literally dropped. I said, so you bring them in before you've ever talked to them for 2 hours into the office. And so, what it is it's not creating great experience for the candidate, and it's not really being effective use of your time. And so I think starting to look at ways that we can continue to be efficient and effective at interviewing. I think companies that get so wrapped up in that, you lose the experience. And I think for me, the experience is always number one. Experience in people, number one. If it's going to take me a little bit longer to fill the job, if it's going to take a couple extra interview steps, you can't sacrifice it. And I think that's the challenge companies have now. It's like, how can we hire faster? How can we hire quicker? but what are you sacrificing when you do that, right? You start to see, reviews come up on Glassdoor interviews and saying, hey, I had an interview and then I never heard from anyone, right? If somebody is giving you their time as a candidate, yes, I understand that everyone that applies, I would love to reach out to everyone that's applied to us and say, thank you so much, but we're not going to move forward. But somebody that's taken their time to do a phone interview, to do a face-to-face interview, to be a phantom, obviously as a lot of candidates are calling it now, I think that's you're not creating a great experience. You're not thinking about the brand. And I think that's something that's really interesting, where at the end of the day, we're brand advocates, and who we are as a company and the values we have and the actions that we do kind of really mirror that. I know a little bit of a tangent, but I think, some of those things are really important on the candidate side. And again, on the employee side, it's looking at, continuous engagement and how can we continue to engage and challenge and make sure that our employees are learning and given opportunities to work on different types of projects and kind of fostering some of those things that we have that are core values as a company that, bring people to Tigerspike. And so again, those are some of the different metrics. Again, we're really, really infancy stage at these, but I think these are some of the really interesting things that we're starting to capture. And we're starting to kind of track and starting to look at trends and analyze it. And even if it's just in an Excel, but how can we start to be a bit more strategic around some of these things, but picking certain things that are kind of important to us versus just, saying, okay, well, here's some data, what can we glean from this data, and having a cool bar charts and stuff.
Right. And Jazz is not the easiest thing to get that.
Well, the challenge is, when you look at before I started, you have a whole bunch of applicants, but then there was nothing tracked in the ATS. So right. The behavior that you had is people looking at resumes in their emails. So there's no data. There isn't even any data that can actually be used. And even people that we've, maybe kind of brought through the process, again, because of the limitations, and obviously they've definitely improved over time, we're not really using it. We're using other tools and other things to kind of capture some of those things. So that becomes a challenge is when your data is all over, and then what is good data and what does that even look like to even be able to get the right data to sure. start to take it from there.
Yeah, it makes sense. And they were so much better when they were resume-ed. No, I'm kidding. So anyway, so we are at the point of the show. So we are New York, and New York is the greatest place for pizza, obviously. We're super busy as HR folks, and so it's very rare we get a chance to go sit down and eat a meal, even though it's probably one of the best restaurants in the country. Where is Tigerspike located here in New York?
Yep. So we are on Park Avenue and 19th Street. So we're kind of flat between Flatiron, Gramercy, Union Square area.
Very cool. Yeah, very cool area in New York. Yeah. So you're recruiting. You're doing HR. You're crazy busy. You don't have time for lunch. You need something quick. What's your go-to spot for pizza by the slice? You want to grab up 2 slices and a can of Coke and drop back into your desk and eat at your desk. Where are you going there?
So I have to say, I've not found a really good pizza place around here. Sorry for the few pizza shops that are nearby, but there were 2 amazing places. So I used to work up by Grand Central for many years. And there was one place called Praviti's, I think it was called, on 41st and Lex, that had the best grandma slice. So I'm even being specific to the type of slice of pizza. The grandma Sicilian. Very, very good. Nice. And
where was that? Where was the grandma slice?
So I think it was called Praviti's. It's right on 41st and Lex. It's right on the corner. It almost looks like you kind of walk down 2 steps to get into it.
I thought you were absolutely going to say Little Italy Pizza by Grand Central. I don't know if you've ever had that.
I've definitely had that one before. That one is definitely probably right up there in the same vein.
So, the entrepreneur in me says I should open up a pizza place in the Flatiron since there's nothing to do there. Well, awesome. So thank you so much. So Janine, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to folks. Where can they find you? What are you doing these days? I'd love to just give you a couple of minutes to promote yourself.
Yeah. So Chief Innovations Officer for Talent Think Innovations. I'm based in Long Island. And, through my firm, it's a business consulting firm. I do workforce planning, tech advisory, amongst other things. It's just growing. But you can find out more about my business at talentthinkinnovations.com. I'm speaking all over the place. So I'm in Philly this week at the Hugh Tech Summit for Philly Tech Week. And then I'm going to be at Unleash in 2 weeks. doing the startup competition out there. I'm one of the judges for their startup stage. So if you're going to Unleash, come find me, say hello. It'd be cool.
Twitter handle is Zarina of HR.
At Zarina of HR, CZARINA of HR.
And you do spot, like you video like quick sessions. I love those. Those are really interesting. I don't know if you're still doing those, but
yeah, I am.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, of course. And Ashley, where can, if folks are interested in Tigerspike, they want to network, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Sure. Well, obviously tigerspike.com. We've got a whole bunch of really fun open global roles all over the country and all over the globe. So definitely check us out. Also Twitter, you can check me out at Digital Ashley is my handle. And side shout out, I've been getting into some amateur photography. So if you want to follow me on Instagram and my photos and my travels, you can follow me at Digi Ashley. Digital Ashley wasn't available, so it's just Digi Ashley on Instagram.
Sounds much more millennial. Digi.
There you go.
Very good. Well, Ashley, thank you, Digi Ashley or Digi Ash, whatever it is. Thank you so much for your time. I'm glad we were able to get you in. You were the first of 2018. Many more to come. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching and look for our next guest for next month. Thank you, guys.